Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. I'm working on catching up in my art journal, so get comfy and let's get crafty. This is Mood Board 24 for the Artsy Trio Facebook group. This is created by Gina Ahrens. It was for like August, I think, and I'm still playing catch up from traveling this summer. I'll be using the color palette mostly from this mood board, but also the idea of exploration. I have a piece of about 8.5 by 5.5 inch. This is acrylic paint paper. The texture on the paper is meant to attract acrylic paint and kind of keep it in and create that texture that acrylic paints create. It may have been the downfall of my technique here. As the title of this video indicates, things I thought I knew about paper crafting. I started out paper crafting mostly in scrapbooking, which transitioned to card making, which transitioned to mixed media and art journaling. And one of the things that I thought I knew about paper crafting was that embossing, heated embossing powder resists. And most of the time it does. So my plan was to cover this piece of paper with all of the colors from the mood board with these distress oxide inks and a foam dauber. And they went on really nicely. I am not trying to blend them into this nice rainbow fashion. I mean, I've got blue and orange next to each other and purple and yellow next to each other and purple and orange next to each other. That's not going to blend pretty because I don't intend to have this be what you see. There's a technique I learned in card making a gazillion years ago that some people call Joseph's coat. Most of the time, it's just an embossed resist technique where you put a foundation color down and then cover it up. But before you cover it up, you put something on top of it. So I am going to make sure that my inks are dry, which is really important. Distress inks and distress oxide inks stay wet for longer. So I'm covering the page with some anti-static powder from my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool. And then I'm just going to use a spoon and spoon some of this clear embossing powder onto my background. Clear is the necessary element here because you want to trap those colors underneath a stamped image. Now, it is a good thing I tested it first because it was not dry. So I just took a dry paintbrush, removed the embossing powder, and off camera, I dried it and tested it again. And when I had to do that 3 or 4 times actually, but when I was satisfied with the dryness of the page, I went ahead and I found this line image of florals. This is an Altenew stamp set. It might be my first ever Altenew stamp set. I know it's super old. It's Baroque motif or something like that. And I'm going to put all of these flowers. I'm concentrating on the upper 2/3 of the page or upper 3/4 of the page because something will cover the bottom. So if there's not stamped images down there, it doesn't matter. But I'm just putting these floral images and the leaves and the stems onto my art journal background. I will not really paying attention to how things are, except that I do kind of want that green, that one green section to mostly have some leaves in it. Now, in this traditional technique, this Joseph's coat or embossed resist technique, you color the background, you stamp an image, you heat emboss it in clear embossing powder, and then when you cover it up, that clear embossing powder resists the next layer of ink and the colors from the background pop up. So I did this with a line image thinking I would have these nice lined rainbow colored outlines of these stamps. And that was part of my plan. The mood board shows a lot of flowers, so I'm using some flowered images to kind of create that rainbow lined images on my background. I'm using Versamark ink to ink up these images. I mushed that ink pad into these images like there was no tomorrow. But the downfall here is that this paper is extremely textured. It is on purpose. I should have used a smoother paper for this technique is what I'm saying. Because even though I have inked up these stamps to high heaven, and even though the embossing powder sticks wonderfully to just the inked images, the texture of the paper kind of gets in the way of the finished result, which means I had to course correct and change my plan. And that's just part of crafting or creating, right? When something doesn't work out, you have two choices: throw it away or move out. And I don't like to throw things away very often. So once I had those florals stamped, I covered them with clear embossing powder and tapped off the extra and heat set these before I went on to phase 2 because I didn't want to knock any of that ink off in phase 2. So you cannot see the clear ink once it's embossed, unfortunately, on camera. In real life, you still can. But then I pulled out another Altenew stamp set, and it's just one that was a little, it might even have been a freebie one time when I ordered a bunch of stuff. It is a butterfly and a flower, I think. But these are solid image stamps, and I wanted to trap more of that color behind a stamped image. So I put some more anti-static powder down on my background page, and I nestled these solid images in between the clear stamped images that I can see in real life that you can't really see on video. It's kind of a unfortunate pain. This had a flower and a butterfly, and they each had 2 layering pieces on top of them. I'm not layering them. I'm just stamping them because you can tell from the outline what they're meant to be. They're meant to be leaves and flowers and butterflies, or a butterfly maybe. I already put the stamp away, so I don't know what the name of it was. And like I said, I think it was a freebie. I'm also putting a ton of ink on these images as well, and I am putting a lot of pressure. Like I am mashing my fingers down onto those stamps to make sure that I get a really good amount of ink. I'm going to add the clear embossing powder again to these images, and then I'm going to relocate them on my page and repeat the same thing. So you can see a little bit better here how that clear powder looks white, and it just sticks to the embossing ink or the wet ink and waits to be heat set. So I am repositioning these images. I'm not trying to make sure they're upright. I didn't clean them off, so if there's a little extra shadow of the clear embossing powder, it's okay. This is not anything of exactness that we're going for here. It's just to have something trap that color, an image, a shape to trap that color down on our background. And I was very indecisive. The stamps were sticking to my fingernails. I mean, it just is a minute. But I got her all done. I got her inked up again. And again, I am mashing that down like nobody's business. Like I think there was as much ink on the lid of my Misty as there was on the stamps because I was really mashing that ink pad in there. And I just repeated. I did the same thing again. I mashed those images down. I mashed them so hard my page stuck to the ink. And then I'm going to cover those images in the clear embossing powder as well. And once I have those images covered, I can start heat setting that clear embossing powder. I did add a little bit more to the images that were stamped first, just to make sure I had good coverage. That embossing ink does stay wet for a while, so that is a possibility. And with these solid images, you can see the shiny spots a little bit more. So here's another thing I didn't know that I thought I knew. I chose archival ink. Okay, so let me back up a minute. You're freaking out right now because this is the scary part. I know. In this technique, you have the colorful background, you have the stamped images in clear embossing powder, and then you cover it up with a darker ink, a blue, a black, or brown. And the embossed images resist that darker color, which is why it's called Joseph's coat, because you have pieces of colorful background popping up through the dark. I chose archival ink because I'm going to be adding other things to this page, and archival ink is waterproof. But guess what else it doesn't do? The embossing powder, the set embossing powder, does not come off of the archival ink. Yeah, so there's another thing I thought I knew that I didn't know about heat embossing and emboss resisting and this technique. You can see the shiny places where I put that clear embossing powder down. But when I take this kind of damp baby wipe over the top, none of it is coming off the embossed area. None of it. It is, this is when I kind of went, well, crap. The collage elements that I have planned for this page are darker, and I was counting on these pops of color in the background to offset that. And it's not working. And not only is it not working, the color, the distress ink, that's the phrase I was looking for, is coming up from behind the archival ink, which means now I have a water reactive ink on the top of my page. Yeah. Okay, so I've got to add some light to the background with this page because the look I was going for did not materialize. So I pulled out my white gouache. This is an acrylic watercolor gouache. I don't know what it's called. Let me pull it on my drawer. I'll tell you what it's really called. It is Liquitex acrylic gouache. It's titanium white. I added some water to it, and with a fan brush, I'm flicking on some white drops. It's kind of a star effect, so we're getting a little bit of a galaxy effect on the page now, especially since those colors are popping through. But because the Distress Oxide ink is popping through the archival ink, all of my white spots are turning colors. So I got out some cheap dollar store white acrylic paint and some water and my fan brush and added some more onto that, hoping that the white acrylic ink did not absorb and reflect the Distress ink as much. It still did a little bit. And yeah, so I have enough white in the background, I think, to offset my collage element. And I'll be using this clear gesso as well. So my collage element are a couple of images I cut out of a National Geographic magazine. One is a picture of a spaceman walking on the moon. And then I have this picture of a hummingbird coming in on this flower. And I want to superimpose them. The spaceman had a probe of some kind in his hand. I just cut that out so I can stick the flower stem in his hand. But I still feel like I need some white in the background, something lighter. So I pulled out this new Hero Arts texture background and the Hero Arts Unicorn White Pigment ink. And this is an image of kind of a map grid. And I chose that because the theme of this mood board is explore and expand. So I thought a map grid was a nice nod to that exploration theme. So I'm just going to stamp this image a couple of times all over my page. I re-inked it, but then I also just used the stamp off, the next generation. Use the leftover ink on the stamp. I didn't re-ink it every time. I just need that background to be a little bit lighter. So I added that a few times. I stamped off a few times. I'm rotating the stamp so I don't get the exact same image every time. Kind of nestling them together to lighten up the background where this collage is going to be, because the collage is a darker photo and the background is now a much darker background than I planned. And we're approaching the time when I learned something else about myself that I already knew. And that is that I'm kind of a klutz. We'll just throw that out there. I shouldn't say I'm a klutz. I don't trip upstairs or anything. But I do have the tendency when I am moving quickly to just create havoc. So I have my background and I'm liking that. I still feel like I'm going to have to do something around the images to kind of pull them up off that background, which is okay because I do that regularly on my collages anyway. So I'm just going to start gluing things down. Instead of using the clear gesso to glue this down because I was worried about that ink spreading, because that water reactive distress oxide ink is now popping up through the waterproof archival ink, I decided to glue this down with a glue stick. So I've just pulled out my Yoo-Hoo collage glue stick. This is a great glue stick if you've never tried it before because the lid screws on, so you can't inadvertently dry it out. However, because I have cut this straight from a magazine, it is a really finicky. And because I've cut around the finger sections of the spacesuit hand, there's some fingery pieces. In fact, I cut the top layer off and I reattached that later because I was just afraid of tearing it completely. So I am just adding a whole bunch of this glue on the back of the first layer of my collage. And I'm going to put this on the bottom part of my sheet and making sure that I leave room for my hummingbird. So slightly to the bottom right. I'm going to smooth this down, make sure that there's as few wrinkles as possible. But before I lay the hands down tight or flat or whatever that proper words would be, before I glue his hands down all the way, there we go. I'm going to ink up this flower stem and turn it into his hands the way that the space probe or shovel or whatever it was, I think it was like a metal detector kind of thing, and put it through his hands the way that that other tool was. In the original photograph, this flower would obviously have been standing upright for the honeybee, oh my gosh, the hummingbird to come in at it from a proper angle. On my page, it looks like this hummingbird is nosediving into this flower, which is substantially larger than it should be, given that that's a human being. But it's okay. That's the fun of collage. By placing exaggerated sizes of images next to each other, that's kind of the fun part of using magazine images for collage. There is another YouTube channel. I'll try and find it and link it below. She does wonderful things. East of Eden, I think, is the channel name. I think. I will try and find it and link it below. But she does amazing magazine collage art. I mean, I love her channel. So now that I have this down, I am going to add a layer of clear gesso over the top. And I'm being very cognizant of that distress ink coming through. Like I can see it popping up through. So I'm trying not to brush it around too much. I need the shine of the magazine paper to not be there because it bugs me, but also it tends to get humid and stick together. I think I've said this before, a very humid area in the summertime. And that humidity can make my collage pages stick together if they're still that shiny magazine page. So I am being cognizant of that ink that's popping up. I'm trying not to move it around too much, but you can totally see that distress oxide ink popping through. And here is where my life just kind of, right there. I had a full-on panic attack because not only did I just knock an entire cup of water over the top of my project, I had an electric tool in my hand. Oh, I thought I was going to kill myself. I really was afraid of electrocution right there. However, so I will say I had to stop. I cleaned up my space and I put this away until it was completely dry. By completely dry, hours later. In fact, it was the next day later. I let this completely dry and everything was fine. It did kind of blend out that background a little bit, mute it back a little bit. But then I remember, then I decided to just keep on trucking, move right ahead. I pulled out a number 10 Jelly Roll white gel pen, and I'm just outlining everything. I'm outlining the hummingbird. I'm outlining the flower. I'm outlining the ground that the spaceman is walking on. And I'm separating the spaceman from that ground background by outlining his legs with this white gel pen as well. And it doesn't, I was a little bit afraid that using a white gel pen would really become too much. It would be too much. It would become the focal image. But really what it does is pull those images off of that dark background that was not how I thought it was going to turn out, and still makes them part of the image itself. I love it. It was the salvation. With my label maker, I have printed out a quote that says, "Live for the moments you cannot put into words," which I kind of felt went along with the exploration theme of this mood board. I'm going to trim this out into 3 phrase blocks and then stack them up on the bottom left-hand side of my page. This video is edited to get rid of things, but it is in real time. This is how fast I craft in real time. Sometimes I think it's nice to see that in a video, because I know for myself, I watch videos of people coloring or ink blending, and I have to remind myself they're not coloring that fast. That has been sped up because coloring takes a while. Ink blending, a nice, perfectly blended background, takes a minute. And in order to make the video not forever and a half long, we speed them up. And I have to remind myself that when I watch other people coloring these fantastic images, I'm like, what? How do they do that fast? Well, it's not fast. But I felt like today I would leave it at real speed just because sometimes I need that reminder. I am going to take this clear gesso and go over the label stickers for the same reason as I went over the whole page, but also it'll help it stay stuck down. If that label was not going to stick to that background for any reason, it now will, because clear gesso can act as adhesive. So, all right, we are rounding the corner to having a finished page. I learned a lot about things I thought I knew in this project. I'm going to cover the back of my page with this pattern paper that I pulled out of my stash. Couldn't even begin to tell you where it's from. It's kind of a thin paper, so I would guess a best of paper pad. You know how they used to do that? They'd take the most popular papers from a bunch of paper pads and put them into one thin paper pad. I don't know. But I don't know. It was in my blue drawer. I have a little drawer set that has my pattern papers sorted by prominent color. And this was in the blue drawer. And it was the easiest drawer to get a paper out of that day. That's really why I chose it. It was the easiest drawer to pull out because my piles of things were not in the way of the other, or all in the way of the other drawers. Okay. Anyways, now that you've learned way more about my untidy craft room than you ever thought you would coming to this video, I'm using Tombow Mono Liquid Glue to glue this page down to that pattern paper. There we go, patterned paper. I am rapidly losing the ability to speak words. I'm going to trim that off with a pair of scissors once I make sure that the edges are completely adhered down. I like the pattern paper on the back. I don't know. I don't do it for all my art journal pages, but for some reason I started that with my very first Artsy Trio page and I just kept doing it. So yeah, it's just a thing now. Got my big, huge, long Tim Holtz nonstick scissors. Got to wipe some of that extra glue off with a baby wipe. And then I'm going to sign. Or first I have to put the mood board on the back. Just grabbing that Tombow glue again. Going to add the mood board. It's going to appear on this side to be on the left-hand side, but it's really on the right-hand side because when I turn my page over, the holes go on the left-hand side. And I'm trying to not punch holes in my mood board photo. I'm going to go ahead and punch the holes in my mood board, and then I can sign it. I'm going to sign it up the left-hand side, and I am going to date it August, even though it is September when I created this, because the mood board was released for the month of August, I think. I'm kind of behind, so I could be wrong. And that is my whole mood board. I encourage you to keep going. When your project does not turn out, or when something you thought you knew turned out to be false, just keep going, because you'll never know what you may come up with. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I have a couple of other videos here I think you might like. I've also added a subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed already, I would love it if you did. Leave me a comment down below. Tell me something new that you learned that you thought you knew already. Give me a thumbs up and have a really fabulous day.